Hi, everyone. It's just after 5 p.m., so I think we're going to get started. Thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to the Salish Sea Green Boating Happy Hour. My name is Melanie. I work for Veda Environmental, and I'm going to be facilitating this event this evening. The first thing we'd like to do is acknowledge that our work takes place on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples. We're joined today by a few experts who were gracious enough to share their time and their knowledge with you all. The first thing that I'd like to do is turn it over to Sarah Brace to introduce herself. Sarah is the executive coordinator of the BC Pacific States Oil Spill Task Force. Take it away, Sarah.
Yay, thanks, Melanie. Hey, thanks everyone for joining today. I'm excited to see there's a good number of people on the webinar. For any of those who are unfamiliar with the Pacific States British Columbia Oil Spill Task Force, we're a coordinating body of the western states of Alaska, California, Hawaii, Oregon, Washington, and the province of BC, with really the primary focus of helping coordinate and advance the prevention, preparedness, and response to oil spills across this region. So it's really exciting to see this transboundary effort happening today, this webinar that's pulling together the expertise and the knowledge and the talents from both folks up in the BC area and this side of the border down in Puget Sound. And it's just these kinds of events that really do help foster that collaboration, that coordination and sharing of information that's invaluable for getting everyone on board and helping protect our Salish Sea waters. So don't want to say much more than that, but I'm thrilled you guys are here. Thanks, Melanie, for taking us down the path and facilitating this today. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what the folks on the webinar will share with us. So with that, I will turn it back to Melanie.
Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate you being here. So before we introduce our panelists today, I want to give everybody an idea of what you can expect this evening. So the first thing is that this webinar is being recorded. And everyone who was able to join us today, you'll have access to this link at the end of the webinar so that if you have to get up, you don't have to worry too much about missing everything. You'll be able to rewatch this at your own leisure. The other thing is that we'll be sharing a document at the end of this that will have a lot of resources that we hope you'll find that will be helpful, and we'll mention a lot of those today. So just know that that's coming, and that at the end of this, we'll be sending an email with a bunch of links and links to documents and PDFs and things like that that hopefully you'll find useful. So in regards to the format for today, we have a couple of presentations, and so that'll kick off right after these introductions, and we'll leave until 5:45. And then the final 45 minutes of the webinar will be with our panelists. We'll go through some questions that we've already gathered, and then hopefully we'll have time for one or two extras from you all. And in regards to questions, if during the presentation and during the panel discussion, you have questions that come to mind, we invite you to use the Q&A feature that you'll find at the bottom of your screen. You can put your questions in there. And if you see other questions that other attendees have put in that you would also like answered, you can vote them up. So to ensure that we prioritize those. We're also inviting our panelists today to, as they have time, if we don't have time to answer some of those questions on screen, they'll be typing responses in. So do check out the Q&A just for more information that you might find useful. I'll have 5 minutes after the presentations to address some of those more clarifying questions. So if something's unclear during the presentation, do put questions in the Q&A, and we'll have some time to go through them at that point, right around 5:45. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Blair Engelbrecht, who will introduce herself, and then the rest of the panelists as well.
Thanks, Melanie, and thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. My name is Blair Engelbrecht. I'm the Boating Programs Manager for Puget Soundkeeper Alliance, and I direct the Clean Marina Washington program, which is a program that's aimed at statewide pollution prevention towards recreational boaters and marinas. And we have 83 certified facilities across the state who have all stepped up to protect the environment around them. The certification is free and voluntary and can really make a big difference in how boaters relate to and impact the world around them. And I have access to a wealth of water quality experts through my partner organizations, Washington Sea Grant, the Department of Ecology, Department of Natural Resources, the Clean Vessel Act program, and the Northwest Marine Trade Association, and the EnviroStars program, who all help me to provide free technical advice to certified facilities. And we also get to do a lot of clean boating outreach and education. If you're attending the Port Townsend Wooden Boat Festival later this year, look for me there. And I'm gonna now pass it over to Erin Barnett with Washington Sea Grant.
There we go. Now I'm unmuted. So my name's Erin Barnett. I'm the Boating Program Environmental Outreach Specialist with Washington Sea Grant. Washington Sea Grant, in case you're not familiar with it, is an arm of NOAA based in Washington, D.C., and we're at 33 different colleges and universities around the nation. And we channel research money to different projects that benefit the areas where we're located. In this state, we channel a lot of research money toward the aquaculture industry, for example. That's a multi-billion-dollar business. We provide education and outreach to stakeholders involved with that. We do tsunami work, tsunami modeling. And one of the programs that we manage is Pump Out Washington, which is in partnership with the state Clean Vessel Act program. It's pump outs. We also have a small spills oil spill prevention program as well that we work alongside folks like Blair with. So I think I'm going to pass it off to Michele.
Thanks, Erin. And first of all, I'd love to thank the BC Pacific States Oil Spill Task Force for bringing us together on such an important topic. And I'm with Georgia Strait Alliance, which is a marine conservation organization in Canada focused on the Strait of Georgia, which is the northern portion of the Salish Sea. And our work takes place on the lands in the traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, many Coast Salish peoples. Our Vancouver office is on the lands of the unceded ancestral and traditional territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh people. And our Nanaimo office, where I'm based out of, is on the land of the Snuneymuxw people. And I'm coming to you today from what is now known as Gabriola Island in the middle of the Salish Sea. Can we get my slides up now? We're going to get into the presentation. Next slide, please. Whales. If you're like me, this is why you boat. In addition to commuting on the water for my entire life, for pretty much a significant amount, I also love getting on the water to experience the natural environment. And if we're lucky, we get to see whales. And unfortunately, our mere presence can actually have a negative impact on these creatures. And my hope is that at the end of our time together today, we can all walk away with some concrete actions that we can take to minimize our impact on southern resident killer whales in particular, but all marine life in general as well. Next slide. So in the waters of Washington State and British Columbia, there are three distinct populations of orcas. There's the big transient orca, which is a marine mammal eater. They will eat harbor seals and sea lions and even sometimes whales. And they range all the way from Mexico to Alaska. There are about 350 transient orcas, and they are listed in Canada as a threatened species. We also have offshore orcas out in the Pacific Ocean. We don't know a lot about them because their range is far offshore, so they're very difficult to study, but they have a varied prey that includes fish and sharks. And there's also the resident orcas. The northern population ranges from halfway up Vancouver Island to the north coast of British Columbia and up to Alaska. And there are about 300 northern residents that are also listed as threatened in Canada. And then we have the southern resident population, which is going to be the primary focus of our presentation today because they're listed as an endangered species, and there are only 75 of them. They eat primarily Chinook salmon. Their diet is very particular, so that's a particular concern for this species. Next slide. So at this point in time, we're at 75 southern resident killer whales. As of December, there were 74 of them with 2 births last year, which is good news, and 1 death, unfortunately, of a very prolific male that was responsible for a large number of births in the southern resident population in the last number of decades. So that was a big loss. And there is a low rate of survival for new calves in the southern resident population. Only about half of them survive past their first year, but thankfully the 2 new calves have been seen in healthy condition this year, and there's also a new calf born in 2021 to L pod, which was spotted in February. And there are 3 distinct pods within the southern resident population. We have a J pod, just missing something here. J pod has a population of 24, K pod has 17, and L pod is up to 34 individuals with the birth of L125 this year. They were listed as an endangered species in Canada under the Species at Risk Act in 2001, and in the United States under the Endangered Species Act in 2005. And while we're not entirely sure of their historical population, it's estimated that there used to be about 200 of them. And when we started tracking them as individuals in the early 70s, we found that there was only 71 individuals remaining after they had been hunted and taken into captivity. And their population increased once we stopped doing that to about 98, close to 100 individuals in 1995, but unfortunately they have since declined back down to 75. So we're going to be looking at some of the key threats to the southern resident population and what we can do as boaters to minimize those threats. Next slide. And those threats are physical and noise disturbance, contaminants, and lack of their primary food source. So in Canada, after listing them as southern residents, we brought together a recovery plan, and new laws for whale watching were announced 2 summers ago. And those rules have been updated in 2020 and 2021, primarily to expand the region that the rules apply in. Next slide. So this summer, the endangered species habitat has been identified as the orange area in southern British Columbia, running all the way from central Vancouver Island, inside waters from Campbell River all the way down around Vancouver, Victoria, the south end of Vancouver Island, and all the way out onto the west coast, partway up the outside of the island. So they have a very large habitat in British Columbia waters, and we're going to talk about what we can and can't do in those waters. Next slide. So within southern BC waters, we have to keep 400 meters away from all killer whales. And the reason it's all killer whales is because your average boater can't tell the difference between southern resident and transient orcas that inhabit these inside waters. So there are some exceptions to that for authorized vessels. Whale watchers in British Columbia, some of them have given up the right to view southern resident orcas at all. And instead, they have been given permission to get within 200 meters of the transient orcas because they can actually tell them apart, and the transient orca population isn't endangered, although they are threatened. I know I'm talking primarily of Canada, but there was some research done in the States in 2011 that shows some interesting results as to why we need to keep our distance in addition to reducing noise and physical disturbance. And it was found that after the States doubled the distance from 100 to 200 yards, that the amount of hydrocarbons in the southern resident population declined. So not only by keeping our distance are we reducing the noise and physical disturbance of the whales, but we're also reducing the pollution, the exhaust that they're exposed to from boats. Next slide, please. So another measure that has been taken to protect them is to implement some interim sanctuary zones. There are 3 distinct zones where you are not allowed to boat or fish from June to November. There are some exceptions, obviously, if there is an emergency or you are rescuing a vessel in distress or accessing local businesses and residences, you can transit through the waters, but primarily those areas are to be avoided. First Nations are also allowed to exercise their rights in those waters. And those zones are on the southwest of Pender Island and the southeast of Saturna Island, which are in the Southern Gulf Islands, and also out on Swiftsure Bank, out at the mouth of the Strait of Juan de Fuca. Next slide, please. There are also going to be some Chinook fishery closures in key foraging areas for southern resident killer whales, and this is just to allow them to catch fish where they tend to hunt. So I'm not going to go into specific fishery closures, but as always, check fishing regulations before you harvest any seafood, and those rules will be up to date where you find out what rules are for the fishing zone that you're in. Next slide, please. In addition to the mandatory measures, there are also some measures that they are requesting us to voluntarily comply with. So these are not law, they're recommendations, but highly recommended that we observe these requests, and they include to stop fishing if you get within a kilometer of killer whales, and to reduce your speed to less than 7 knots when within a kilometer of them. And if it's safe to do so, to turn off fish finders and eco sounders, which will obviously help with minimizing underwater noise. And if you happen to, because we can't always predict where a whale is going to surface, if you happen to get within the approach distance and find yourself not in compliance with the laws, that's okay if it was an honest mistake and not at your fault, because there will be enforcement out on the water this summer watching for compliance with these regulations. But if you do happen to get close and it was unintentional, that's fine. Just turn your boat to neutral and idle. And I would even go further than that and say, if it's safe, turn your boat off and just minimize the noise for them. Next slide, please. There's also some other things that we need to be aware of for whale watching in Canada. If you're in the rest of BC, you still need to keep 200 meters away from all whales or any other species of whale, porpoise, or dolphin that appears to be at rest or that has a calf. And then any other whale that doesn't follow into the 400 or 200 meter category, you need to stay at least 100 meters away from. So in Canada, it's illegal to disturb or interact with, touch, feed, swim, or dive with any marine mammals, just to let you know what the laws are there. And best practices, just don't chase, don't cut across, don't stop in front of or approach them head on, give them their space and avoid any abrupt changes in your course or any erratic maneuvers. And avoid splitting them up or trapping them between other boats or the shore. Next slide, please. So we're seeing a huge increase on our coast in larger whales as well. Humpback whales are making a bit of a comeback here, and that also is an increased risk for both the whales and boaters. There have been incidences of injury, damage to boats, injuries to the whales, and serious injury and death to people for boating near large whales. So the law is 100 meters with large whales, unless they're at rest or with calf, which is 200 meters. But I would recommend, given that they're so acrobatic and large and oblivious to boats, it's wise if you see them to stay at least 200 meters away. Next slide, please. If you don't actually see the whale yourself, you can tell that there are whales in the area. If you see the whale warning flag, it is raised when there are whales nearby and then taken down when they have left the area. And here in Canada, you can get them from the Marine Education and Research Society. Next slide, please. So in addition to the whale watching regulations, which we're going to learn about in Washington State as well, there's also differences in our sewage pump out regulations on either side of the border. And unfortunately in Canada, in large stretches of the coast and in more remote areas, there are no pump outs. And so our laws are not nearly as strict because we need to allow dumping in some areas. So the law is that you cannot dump unless you're 3 miles offshore, unless you cannot get 3 miles offshore and there is no pump out nearby. So if you're in more enclosed waterways and there is no pump out handy within a reasonable distance of where you are, then you can still dump, unfortunately, but you can in the fastest flowing ebbing waters with your boat underway. So there are loopholes to the rule that allow dumping in Canadian waters, but we encourage you to pump out if at all possible. You can plan ahead and try and figure out where you're going to need a pump out if at all possible. On the next slide, we'll see that on our website we have a map of pump out stations in British Columbia, and like you can see, there are large stretches of the coast without any pump outs at all. And so I'm going to turn you over to Aaron to talk about what things are like south of the border.
Thank you, Michelle. Okay, next slide, please. So I wanted to start off my section with some research that came out just last year, this year actually, January 2021. A study that was headed by NOAA and with some partners, and they studied the Southern Resident Killer Whale pod and found that vessel proximities does have impact on feeding habits, and in particularly one sex compared to the other. I forget if it's male or female, but the information is right there, and anybody is welcome to email me if they want a link to that study. It is a peer-reviewed study that was published in Frontiers in Science. So next slide, please. So Michele really kind of laid the groundwork for a lot of this, because a lot of this issues and best management practices are all pretty much the same. The main difference between the distance regulations in Washington as compared to Canada is that there's a 300 yards a beam. So it's 400 yards ahead and abaft, which is similar to meters, obviously. And then the whales can be 300 yards a beam. That is the primary difference in regulations between Canada and Washington State. Next slide. So we have a voluntary no-go zone on the east side of San Juan Island. This is a big area for the southern residents. They feed in here. If you're looking for good pictures for them, I suggest you go to Limekiln Point. You can usually find some there during the summer. It's a quarter mile offshore from Mitchell Point to Kettle Point and a half mile around Limekiln Point State Park. And again, this is voluntary. And when they're out there, there'll probably be a boat or two from either NOAA or one of the whale watchers. Sound Watch, I believe, is the predominant killer whale watch organization that's there, and they'll let you know. So next slide, please. And as Michele mentioned, you can get one of these whale flags in the United States. You can get them in San Juan County. You can get them at Fishery Supply, which is a retailer in Seattle, and you can get them at the Whale Museum in Friday Harbor. And like Michele said, you fly them if you see a whale, and it alerts other boaters to the fact that there's whales in the area. Next slide, please. So one of the things that Sea Grant does is we develop tools, and we came up with this Orca Rangefinder, which is one of these. It's a business card side. It basically creates a huge giant right triangle with your eyes. You close your right eye and open your left, and then you put the whale on the mark, and then you close your left, open your right, and then you can kind of guesstimate they're about 400 yards away. Again, these are not intended for navigation, but they'll get you in the ballpark, and they're free. And feel free to email me if you want one. I'll be happy to send you one. And we're going to be remodifying these, so the next batch will actually have a easier reference options. So the size of the whale at 400 yards will be on the card that you can hold out in front of you and compare with, if you don't feel like closing your eyes and doing plain trigonometry. Next slide, please. You can report violators, and you can get other information from the Whalewise site. And there's some links there. You can just Google Whalewise or Whalewise, and it'll take you right to that site. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk about pollution prevention in Washington, and it really comes down to two things: sewage and petroleum products. And we'll just go ahead and get into it. Next slide, please. So Washington State, like Michele said, has a very robust pump out program, and it's a direct link to the National Clean Vessel Act program. This is money that comes from the United States Congress to fund pump outs. In Washington State, there are 161 points of pump out and 200 total if you count porta potty restrooms. Washington Sea Grant has created a couple of ways that people can find these things, because Washington has just created a no discharge zone, which basically applies to type 1 and type 2 marine sanitation devices. So in Washington, as of 2 years ago, you cannot discharge any sewage, whether it's treated or not, in Washington waters. It used to be just raw sewage within 3 miles, similar to Canada. Is there any way we can click on the Pump Out Washington link there, or the Pump Out Nav app? Can we click on one of those and show and share that? Can we go back to the last slide? Is it possible to go back to the last slide and share the website?
A second, and I'm going to pull the website up here.
Especially the app. I really want to let people know about this interactive app. It's an interactive app called Pump Out Nav, and it'll, from your location, it will direct you to the nearest operating pump out. And if you encounter a pump out that's not working, you can report an issue, and we'll get on and find out what's happening with it. But it's been very popular.
Okay, give me just a second. We're going to go ahead and share this website now.
Okay. This is what we did during COVID. I was stuck in my home, and so we decided, well, let's just populate this thing. Okay, that's the Pump Out Washington website. You can find out why pump out, how to pump out, where to pump out. We have a Google map, a static Google map at the bottom of the page. Now, if you can click on that Pump Out Nav app there, where it says download the app today, or actually, that's good enough. Yeah, see if you can get on there. Okay, so this will just give you an idea of what you can and can't do. It's from California. It's a national product, a national coverage that started in Canada and it started in California in the San Francisco Bay Area. So if you see those green dots on there, those are operational pump outs, and the red markers are non-operational pump outs. And like I said, it'll direct you to the nearest operational pump out. And if you do get there and it's not working, you can report an issue and it'll get dealt with. You know, I think that's good enough. So next slide. So we also give away these pump out adapters, and what they do is they connect your boat to a pump out, like your house, like in the same way your house is connected to your local sewage system, and they're free as well. And my email is in this presentation, and email me, and I'll be happy to send you one. Next slide, please. So, and now we're going to talk about oil spill, and that's the petroleum product. And this is a subject we can talk about a lot of, but I'm going to keep it short and sweet. A lot we're going to talk about is just basics, common sense, best management practice that most of you probably know about anyway. Next slide, please. So one of the big questions we get is what defines an oil spill in the United States? And it's basically a visible sheen, and that they use that verbiage, a visible sheen, and the sheen can come from a teaspoon or a cup or a gallon. Different people have different ideas of what constitutes a small spill, but legally it's a visible sheen. Next slide, please. So again, we give away things to educate the public and people, particularly that are new to boating, how to prevent spillage, particularly during fuel transfer. And one of the things that we give away are these fuel bibs. These fit around the nozzle of the fuel nozzle before fueling. It goes on the deck, don't catch any drips. The Coast Guard auxiliary person there is holding a pad, and you can buy these pads at West Marine or any marine retailer or environmental cleanup supply place. Even Granger Industrial hardware stores have them sometimes. And again, these bibs are free. My email is the same for all this stuff. If you email me, I'll send you a box of things that are useful. Next slide, please. So oily bilge water is another big problem. The way, you know, the best way to keep oil out of their bilge is to keep it in your engine, you know, and then keeping an engine in good working condition means getting down there and tightening up those bolts on the oil pan, tightening up the bolts at the fuel connections. And then in the event that it does come out, which does happen, diesel fuel is particularly viscous and it has what they call legs. Diesel fuel is a way of finding its way to just about anywhere. So keep oil sorbent pads under the engine, and you can take a common household item like a paint tray, put a few oil pads in it, or a cookie sheet, put some oil pads in, throw it in there, modify it so it'll fit underneath your engine, and it'll collect any drippings. You do not want to use sewage pump outs to clean bilges. This is something that can damage the pump out, even though it's a very convenient and handy vacuum cleaner that you can pull up to. Please don't do that. Sometimes they've been known to suck up screws, metal, and damage the equipment. Next slide, please. So what to do if you do have a spill? The law is that you have to report it. Firstly, it's illegal to try masking a spill with a dispersant, and this is Joy, Dawn, for example. Stuff works great. I admit it works great to disperse a spill, but the fines can be bigger for trying to hide it than the spill itself. And where I'm going with this is don't let someone else report it for you. Now, I was a Coast Guard boarding officer and I did oil spill enforcement, and I've seen some pretty sad stories of people having spills, trying to hide it. It gets reported by somebody else, and they get far more bigger trouble than they had to. So call the numbers on the next slide, and let Ecology, the Coast Guard know. And basically, Ecology will just tell you to just clean it up, do the best you can, unless it's a big spill that they feel like they need to respond to. Next slide, please. Oh, I guess that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you, Michele. Excellent presentations. I haven't seen any questions come through from those presentations, but I'm just going to give, we're doing really well on time. So I'm just going to give folks a minute or two. If you do have a question, feel free to pop it in the chat right now and we can get it answered for you. Otherwise, if we don't see anything in a minute or two, we can launch into the panel. But I'll give folks just a minute to process some of what they heard. All right. So we'll kick it off with the panel now. So, oh wait, I do see a question that came in. Just thanking for those distance cards because it can be so difficult to tell. So yeah, and as Erin mentioned, you can email him for a few different freebies. So Washington residents, you can collect Erin's email. We'll flash it again at the end of the webinar today so that you can reach out and get some of those. Okay, we do have a question. What should I have on board in case some oil or diesel spills? So after I call the hotline to report the spill, what should I have to immediately deal with the spill is what I'm gathering from that question.
I'll answer it. You know, a lot of seasoned boaters here in Washington will have a stack of pads. Some will even have a boom. You can pick up a boom at any marine retailer. You know, they call them sausages and you can connect them together. Some boaters go get that serious. They actually have a small oil spill response kit that could respond to actually a pretty decent sized spill. But the big thing is to have some pads, stack of them, maybe, you know, 6 inches tall. And then they're not expensive. But that's the best thing you can have is some pads.
Great.
And then, you know, when they're full of oil, you put them in a bag and then they need to be disposed of at a hazardous waste facility.
Thanks, Erin. This next question, we might not have an answer. It's a little bit outside of the scope, but I'll pose it anyway, just in case. What is the impact of plastics on larger marine mammals? And if someone wants to tackle that, that's great. Otherwise, we can maybe direct this attendee to other more information.
I can take a stab at it.
Okay.
The organization that I work with does a lot of work on marine debris and plastics. And really it's when you like release a plastic into the environment, they typically will break down into like microscopic little pieces. And then those work themselves up the food chain. So orca are not really like swimming around eating plastic bags, right? But like the fish that they're eating do tend to have an accumulation of different kinds of microplastics in their systems. And it can, I'm pretty sure that there's some research, I'll have to double check, but I'm pretty sure that it can affect a female orca's ability to successfully feed her calf because they're transferring all of those toxins to the calf.
Great.
Canada's just made thank you. Canada's just made a move to classify plastics as a toxin. This just came out a couple weeks ago, so that's really good news for our ability to regulate plastics. So we're looking forward to what comes out of that.
Great. Thanks, Michele. Great questions. You can continue to add to the Q&A. And I see another comment about a new number for reporting spills to Ecology's Northwest Regional Office. So that number, I'm going to copy it and put it in the chat as well so that everyone can see that easily. If you have more questions, please continue to add into the Q&A and we'll likely have time at the end of the panel discussion to get to those. Okay, so our first question, I'm going to direct this to Blair to start. Given that pollutants are one of the 3 biggest threats to the survival of southern resident orcas, what are the biggest actions boaters can take to minimize pollution from recreational boating?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different things. I'll try to keep my answer short-ish. I think that probably one of the first and biggest mistakes that boaters can make is creating a fuel spill. So like Erin talked about, there's a lot that you can do to prevent that. I'd like to just add probably the reason that most spills happen is because we're always in a hurry and we stop paying attention. So most marine fuel systems, you'll find they don't have the clip on the nozzle to allow you to just fuel hands-free. But if you find that, please don't use it and just go slow. It's great to have someone else help you listen for that high-pitched whistle sound that happens when you're nearing the end of your fueling experience, and try not to top off your boat. I know it's tempting when we're going on long trips especially, but just plan for an extra fuel stop, because if you get into high seas, it can slosh out of the air vent on the other side. And then boat maintenance is a really big one. I know that it is somewhat cost prohibitive to haul your boat out sometimes to do maintenance work, but if you are able to do so, I highly recommend that you do it for, I mean, anything that involves paint or sanding or solvents. Just haul out. If you can't, you are supposed to place a tarp between your boat and the dock, so that you can catch anything that might fall off of that. You are allowed to work on, I think it's 25% of the superstructure, so the boat above the water, at your fuel dock, or I'm sorry, at wherever you're keeping your vessel. But I would recommend that you haul out when you can and if you can. And obviously it is a Washington state law that you cannot do any hull work while you are in the water. So if you're scraping the bottom of your boat, that has to be done at a haul out facility. And trying to think, I feel like I'm running out of time. I would also encourage all of you to check out the EPA Safer Choice program. They have a very long list of approved products that are better for the environment. There are a lot of cleaning solvents that say biodegradable or eco-friendly especially, but there is no regulation on the word eco-friendly. So you never really know if what you're buying is really truly better for the environment. So I'd encourage you to check out their database and replace some of your boat maintenance products with some of their listed products.
Thank you, Blair. That's great. And I'll add that the Safer Choice page to the list of resources so that folks can access it that way. Michele or Erin, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, well, I'm a boater, and I found that a lot of times you don't even really need cleaning products, just elbow grease, maybe some vinegar. And if I do use a cleaning product, it's usually citrus based. And some products actually have gone so far as to get approved from the EPA shake flask test, which is biodegradable in 28 days at 80%. And that's not, there actually is a biodegradable test. It's a shake flask test. They also call it the trout test. But not too many products use that. There's a company in Seattle called International Lubricants that makes some stuff that is seed oil based that actually can apply. But Blair's right. There's not much. You know, I mean, plutonium's biodegradable, right?
Yes.
So, yeah, be careful on what you buy for cleaning products, and that label of environmentally friendly. It doesn't always mean anything.
In Canada, non-toxic is a regulated term, so you can be pretty safe to go with non-toxic avoid biodegradable here again doesn't mean anything, neither does environmentally friendly. And like Aaron suggested, there's lots of things in your galley that you can use: vinegar, lemon juice, baking soda, and especially in Canada where there's more sewage dumping of the holding tank, that's really important. Avoid using ammonia or formaldehyde ingredients in your holding tank and that sort of thing. Lots of great tips from Blair too. Thank you.
Yeah, this is excellent. Thank you all so much. We'll move on to our next question now. So Aaron, I think if you can respond first to this one. In addition to the importance of preventing fuel spills and dirty bilge water discharge, are there other ways boaters can reduce their pollution?
Yeah, outboard, if you're going to be filling, one common cause of spillage is at boat launches. So people will oftentimes fill their gas cans like near the water, and the best place to fill a gas can for a outboard motor is at your home, or somewhere away, So if you're gonna bring a fuel tank for an outboard motor, fill it up before you take it to the launch pad. I mean the launch, boat launch. Sorry, I had a brain aneurysm there. And back to boat maintenance, check fuel lines. Fuel lines get cracked. Hydraulic lines age after about 13 or 14 years, especially if they're exposed to sun and salt. Windlasses on large boats oftentimes will have a hydraulic line, about 2 or 3 feet of it on the foredeck. It gets forgotten about, and hydraulic fluid is under very high pressure. And sometimes they'll just burst and pop, and hydraulic spills are not fun to clean up. But yeah, that doesn't happen very often, but it can, keep an eye on those things that degrade and are fairly inexpensive to replace. Like there's all, and I'm sure there's other things we can talk about, but I can't really think of other things right now. So I'm going to pass it off to Michele.
Waste disposal is a big area of concern, and especially on, boats with limited space. It's a really good idea to have a really good waste storage system on board so that you have containers for all the different streams of waste that you're going to come across, and plan out your trip so that you know where you can get rid of those things. And if it doesn't come from the marine environment, don't put it there. It doesn't really matter what it is. Someone thinks maybe an apple core is not a big deal, but we should still store our compost on board until we can dispose of it. There's 700,000 boaters in British Columbia. So one apple core doesn't make a big deal, but you get 700,000 boaters doing that. And we tend to congregate in bays where there's, sheltered areas where the water doesn't necessarily flow and clear the area very well. And there's really no such thing as a way. It's a pristine environment, and we want to keep it that way. So plan to keep everything out of the water. Reduce your packaging before you head out on the boat. Get rid of any excess packaging so you don't have to pack it around with you. And yeah, just plan out your trip and plan where you're going to get rid of those things or bring them home with you. Pack it in, you pack it out.
Great. Excellent. This next question has to do with derelict vessels. So the derelict vessels are a major problem along our coastlines, and it's not just a hazard to navigation and safety, but a significant risk to sink and release pollutants on board if they go down. So what are governments on both sides of the border doing to address both legacy problem vessels and prevention of ADVs or abandoned derelict vessels from becoming a problem? Michele, we can start with you.
So there's been a lot of movement in Canada in the last few years, thankfully, because prior to July 2019, so 2 summers ago, it was not even illegal in Canada to sink a boat. It just, the laws just didn't consider that. So you could abandon a boat, you could sink a boat, and no one could do anything about it unless there was pollution involved in it, of course, which falls under other laws. So we have a law in place now that prevents the abandonment of a boat, the sinking of a boat, intentionally causing a boat to become a wreck, and not properly maintaining vessels. So there's also enforcement behind that, which is great. We're in year 4 of the Ocean Protection Plan from the federal government of Canada, which has 2 funds for the identification and inventorying of legacy abandoned vessels, and also funding for the removal of those vessels. And we've had hundreds of vessels removed so far, which is brilliant news. Just this year, the British Columbia government has created a I'm forgetting the name of that. 1 second, I think I have it handy here. Clean Coast, Clean Waters Initiative, which is putting funding into cleaning up both marine debris and derelict vessels. The only prevention work that we currently have in place is the Ocean Protection Plan has funding for outreach and education, like this sort of thing, to teach boaters how to prevent their vessel from becoming a problem vessel, and also what to do at the end of a useful life of a boat.
Thanks, Michele. Erin, can you talk about Washington and in particular the voluntary vessel turn-in program?
Well, yeah, Washington has had a pretty robust abandoned derelict vessel program for a while. In fact, I think it was the first in the country. It's been around 13, 14 years. Correct me if I'm wrong, something like that. It's funded through a $1 or $2 fee tacked on a boater registration. So that's how it's funded, and that's been expanded last year. So the voluntary vessel turn-in program, or VTIP, is part of is an offshoot of the abandoned derelict vessel program, which is managed by the Department of Natural Resources in Washington State. So if you Google Department of Natural Resources, Washington, abandoned derelict vessel program, you'll get to the site. Now the VTIP program, which is if you put in VTIP along with Department of Natural Resources, you'll come up with a page specifically to that. So basically, Department of Natural Resources will come and get your boat for free. And it's really intended to keep boats off Craigslist, which people can buy sometimes for $10 or free. And then a lot of times these boats end up on the beach and they release pollutants. And, you know, the gift that keeps on giving, they say. So in the county I live in, this has been used by some people who've had boats in their backyards for years, and it's just easier for them to get rid of them that way. And like I said, the state will come by and take them off their hands for free. Transfer title if there is a title. And there's more information on their website.
We're envious of your program. I should mention that in Canada, we're also strengthening our pleasure vessel licensing requirements. So it's historically been incredibly challenging to track down an owner of a derelict vessel. It's, you know, still registered 3 owners ago when they try and track down whoever is responsible for a wrecked vessel. So they're changing the rules to every 5 years instead of every 10, and every vessel over 6 meters instead of every vessel with at least a 10-horse motor.
Similar problems here as well.
That's great. I put the link to DNR's the vessel turn-in program in the chat, so folks can access it that way and learn more about it. Blair, anything you'd like to say on this topic before we move on?
No, I think that they covered it pretty well.
Yeah, lots of traction on this issue right now, which is great. So Michele, I'll turn this over to you. We're going to pivot back to whales. So what are some of the other considerations for boating around larger whales that folks should be aware of?
So I did go into that in the presentation. Sorry, I wasn't intending to when we had built this, the questions for this section. But like I said, the large whales can be extremely acrobatic and oblivious of boats. So we really need to keep our distance. Probably it's wise to do so beyond the requirement of only 100 meters away, because they can come up quite unexpectedly and with quite devastating consequences. We can watch for things like a bunch of feeding birds, bubbling water and fish coming up and stuff, which can indicate bubble feeding of the whales coming up, which can, you don't really want to be in the middle of that when they surface. Another potential concern is there's a lot of videos out there about people rescuing entangled whales, and there are increasing numbers of marine mammals entangled on our coast in marine debris. And you need to call the experts if you see that. Do not try and help. You can cut off a float, say, that's attached to a line or something, and you can be causing more problems for the whale because they might not be able to get at that. So it's best to call the experts. The BC Marine Mammals Response Network is where you want to call. There's a whole list of who to contact in our guide to green boating for spill reporting, marine mammals in distress, where to dispose of pollution, and all that kind of stuff is listed in the back of our guide, which you'll get a link to at the end of the presentation. Any other thoughts on large whales from anyone else?
I was just going to add, just kind of like to drive home the point that you know, like we can't hear our rangefinders and our fish finders, but Orca can. So if you do spot them, please turn them off. And if it is safe, again, please also turn off your engine. And also, when I first moved to Washington, all that I wanted in my life was to kayak with orcas, because I saw so many videos online of people getting up so close and like, yes, it's not a motorized vessel, so it doesn't really create noise, but it's very dangerous and it can disturb them. So please just stay away. And if you really want to like submit your or cement your commitment to staying 1,000 meters away or yards, I have a link to a boater pledge that my program partners with the Seattle Aquarium on. That's just like a fun extra thing to do.
I'll talk about entanglement in Washington. So if you're in Washington and you come across an entangled marine mammal, this applies to all marine mammals, not just killer whales, you can call the Coast Guard on channel 16. And they'll call the NOAA Marine Mammal Protection Program, and their number, they have a toll-free number. Maybe Melanie, you can put this in the chat, 1-877-767-9425. I'm not sure if my chat will go to the attendees, so thank you. But like Michele was saying, just stay away from them. Stay away from entangled marine mammals. Not only can you hurt the animal more, you get hurt yourself trying to do that.
Great. Since we're on the topic of whales, we have a question from one of the attendees I'm going to pose now, and this is for you, Michele. The new Southern Resident Killer Whale Protection Areas are quite confusing. Is there a good map that you can recommend that makes it more clear?
I will put a link in the chat to the whole group. You can go to Georgia Strait Alliance, our website, and we have links to everything there as well. So I'll link you up with all the information you need to know on that. And yes, the rules are confusing. Understood. I'll put that in there right now.
That's great. Excellent. Okay, we're going to pivot over to marinas. I think Michele, have you respond to this first as well. So we've talked a lot about individual boater practices that folks can do to help minimize their impact. What are marinas doing to minimize their impact?
So in British Columbia, we have the Clean Marine BC Marina Eco Certification Program. So we have 33 facilities that are certified by our program, and another 29 enrolled to be certified. And we don't just certify them for environmental best practices, but we help them to improve upon those practices. We provide resources for them on how to do that, on the laws, and also what's better than the minimum legal requirements. And we also do marine spill response trainings for marinas. And our first marina was certified in 2008. And what we have seen over time, because we recommend improvements across the 3-year certification term and what we'd like to see them do in that time, we have seen we use an anchor rating system, a top rating of 5 anchors, and we've seen those ratings go up at many of our facilities over time. And even our 5 anchor marinas, we now have 11 of them, and they're still always raising the bar on best practices. So it's really good to see the industry embracing that program and continually getting better in best practices. We have very innovative projects happening at a lot of our marinas, enhancing Gary Oak meadows, which are an endangered ecosystem on our coast, covering creosote pilings with a liner so that when herring spawn, they don't die on the toxic creosote pilings. Purple martin nesting boxes. We now have a lot more purple martins than they were down to a handful of breeding pairs a while ago, and now there's thousands of them. So lots of great projects, and they're really embracing our philosophy of continual improvement. And our Marina Best Practices Handbook is available to every marina in the province, regardless of if they're part of the program or not.
Thanks, Michele. Blair, can you chime in a little bit and maybe talk about Clean Marine Washington?
Yeah, so a lot like the program up north, we are a voluntary certification that goes beyond what is just required by law for marinas to do, which there is not a marina permit that exists in Washington. There are a bunch of different laws that randomly apply to them, like if they have a fuel dock, they have to do a bunch of stuff there. If they're on DNR land, like a lot of them are having to do some environmental protections for that. But generally, like there isn't, a master document that says here's what you have to do. So that's where we come in. And there's 83 certified marinas. We just got a new certification today. And essentially, we have a 22-page long application, and it breaks down best management practices into kind of 4 main categories. So there's spill prevention is number 1. So we're asking them, can you stock extra absorbent material that you can provide to boaters free of charge? Do you have ample spill kits, especially if they have a fuel dock, to be able to contain any spill that would happen here? Can you train one of your employees in a HAZWOPER program? Bunch of stuff like that. And then we also ask that they kind of create some best management practices for their tenants when they're fueling as well, so that they're educating people on how to best fuel their vessel. And then there's product and waste storage. So probably one of the biggest behind fuel environmental issues that marinas can create is that they have to store a lot of hazardous material around, oils, paints, solvents, fuel, like all kinds of stuff. And there is a very specific way to store that so that it doesn't create a larger environmental problem. So we do have a lot of requirements about Are you keeping your used oil bins in secondary containment in case they fail? We ask, but we don't require because it is expensive, that they provide hazardous waste disposal for their tenants. A lot of them do, and some of them will even provide it for community members as well, so not just tenants of the marina. And then we also ask that they purchase products that are, this is fairly new, but that they are EPA Safer Choice certified products. And then there's purchasing and inventory management. So, you know, if Ecology is responding to a disaster at your marina, God forbid, they really need to know like what you have on site that it could potentially make it worse. So keeping a really clear record of everything that you have purchased that is hazardous is really helpful. And then the employee and tenant involvement is a really big one as well. So, you know, training all of your employees on what your spill response plan is that we ask them to keep posted in case of an emergency. And then also that we have a whole suite of materials that we provide the marinas, individual spill kits, a boater's guide, rack cards about the no discharge zone and gray water. Erin provides us with a lot of stuff, and we ask that they give that out to their tenants so that they're helping us to spread that education.
Excellent. Erin, do you have anything to add?
We've got a lot of stuff to give away.
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of useful stuff like the adaptive fuel bibs. Blair hands a lot of that stuff out. We work in tandem with the Clean Marina program quite a bit. So
Great.
I think they covered it all pretty well.
Awesome. Excellent. I have a question I'll pose to you, Michele. Not sure if you'll know the answer to this, but what, if anything, are marinas obliged to do regarding floating polystyrene coming off of docks in British Columbia?
Well, unfortunately, it's not illegal to use polystyrene in British Columbia. Hopefully, with the new legislation around plastics being a toxic substance, this is something that's going to change. That would be my personal desire to see. The Clean Marine BC program best practices, obviously, no exposed foam flotation. However, it's possible for a marina to get certified with that because it's not against the law as long as they're performing well enough across the rest of the recommendations that they get a minimum passing score. So they could potentially get 1 or 2 anchor rating even though they have that. It's something that will change. Hopefully we will see that legislation coming in place that you can't have that, but it's an extreme problem here. It is a huge, you see a lot of it in the water and it's very unfortunate.
Yeah, hopefully change coming. So this is our last question. So for all the attendees, we have plenty of time to answer more of your questions after this. So feel free to add them in the chat, and we want to be as interactive as possible. So if you'd like, we can also unmute you and you can ask your question yourself. So feel free to type them in and we'll call on you to ask the question yourself if you feel comfortable. So the last question we have is, I'll turn it to you, Erin, first. So we've focused a lot on the southern residents. We talked a little bit about large whales, but what about other wildlife and habitats on our coastlines and fresh waterways? So what, if maybe you could talk about other sensitive habitats and things to be aware of?
Well, you know, I mean, forage fish all rely on these shallow estuary type environments. Forage fish are needed by salmon and killer whale, and the big top shelf predators eat the salmon. You know, the aquatic food pyramid starts kind of at the marine estuary areas. You know, I would suggest if somebody is canoeing in a river and they see a pollutant entering the river, like say from some pig farm, report it. You know, called Department of Ecology. They have a hotline, I believe, for reporting that. The Puget Soundkeeper Alliance has a hotline for reporting, particularly with industry. And a lot of times folks aren't aware of it. You know, businesses just aren't aware of it. They just need to have it pointed out. So I'm going to put a link in the chat for invasive species because I saw that was on there. But I'm not really, you know, I'm not a scientist, but I just think it's just something that everyone needs to be aware of. You know, when they're out boating, you know, if you're going to be anchoring in an area, make sure you're not anchoring in eelgrass. And there's in some places, particularly around San Juan County, they have these voluntary no anchor zones where they have eelgrass and they have buoys up to say, please don't anchor here. There's eelgrass, stuff like that. You know, just be wary that there are indicators out there that this is a sensitive area. And that's what I'll have to say about, you know, sensitive aquatic environments. Be aware of them.
Thanks, Erin. Michele, anything to add?
Something we haven't really touched on is controlling our pets. You know, if you're in an area where there might be shore nesting birds, or like Erin said, eelgrass is very sensitive and you might just want to move over and not romp in that area, not moor in that area, and just be hyper, you know, estuaries are incredibly sensitive. Watch your wake. You know, stay out of the shallow water if at all possible. Don't turn up the bottom and that sort of thing. Obviously, don't dump anything in those sensitive habitats or anchor in them if you can avoid it. And also with the preventing the spread of aquatic invasive species, you know, we always need to remember to clean and drain and dry our vessels, our equipment, our trailer when transporting between different bodies of water, so that we're not unintentionally moving an invasive species from one body of water to another. You know, in our marine environment, I guess the big one really is the European green crab. So, you know, don't have your grandbabies or your babies transporting buckets of crabs from one place to another and not knowing what kind of crab those are, that sort of thing. Yeah, not unintentionally moving creatures from place to place is a bad plan. So.
Great. Thank you so much. All of this information, all of these tips are incredibly useful. If anyone in the audience has a question that they'd like to ask directly, you can feel free to raise your hand, or you can continue to add any additional questions into the Q&A or into the chat. While you're thinking, I'm going to add that document of resources into the chat now. I'll email it out to all of the participants, but I probably won't get to that until tomorrow. So I just want to send it over now in case you have something in mind that we were talking about that you want to look at right away. So I'll pop that into the chat for folks to look over. And if there are no further questions, then we can kind of wrap things up. There's just a few people that we'd like to thank. Chelsea, if you could go back to the PowerPoint, that would be great. And while Chelsea's pulling that up, I really want to thank our host organizations, so Georgia Strait Alliance and Washington Sea Grant, and Michele and Erin, thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Blair, so much for being on the panel with us. We appreciate all of your knowledge and insight. And of course, thanks to the Pacific States British Columbia Oil Spill Task Force for sponsoring this. And thank you, Sarah, for being here. Georgia Strait Alliance would also like to thank all of the sponsors that you see here on the screen. So thank you. And then just a reminder for all the attendees, again, that this has been recorded. We'll share the link to everyone. So if you hopped in a little late and missed some of the conversation at the beginning, you can tune that in and rewatch and catch anything that you might have missed. If you can go to the next slide, where we have contact info. So here is all the information if you want to reach out to Michele, if you have any follow-up questions. Her email and the Georgia Strait website and info is on the screen. And then on the next slide is Aaron's contact info. So any of those freebies that he mentioned, so the fuel bibs, the connector, the rangefinder, the Orca Rangefinder, anything else that I'm missing, Aaron? Are those the three biggies?
Those are the three biggies, but depending on what comes to our office, usually I fill up a bag of goodies with other things. Hand sanitizer, swag, key fobs, you name it.
Yeah, reach out and see what you can get. Free stuff, right? And also, if you have any questions, I'm sure Aaron wouldn't mind if you reach out to his email him as well. And with that, thank you all so much for taking time out of your evening to be here with us. We really appreciate it. I hope you gained something valuable and learned some things that you can pass along to fellow boaters on the water. And we hope you have a great summer and enjoy the beautiful seas that we are lucky enough to be so close to. So have a great evening, everybody, and thanks again.